Wow, look at all these shiny cars.
They are pretty nice, aren't they? Let's go over and check that one out.
You clearly cannot afford this.
I just wanted to show her. Our money is just as good here.
The dealership went silent the moment Marcus Coleman walked through the glass doors holding his daughter's hand, because everyone inside already knew what kind of man they thought he was, and they were about to be proven catastrophically wrong. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet strength of people who are underestimated every single day, hit that like button right now, drop a comment below, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Kindness Corner, because this story is about to remind you why we all need to believe in redemption. Marcus had parked his rusted-out 2003 pickup truck right at the entrance of the luxury car dealership, the same truck that had carried him through 6 years of double shifts, missed birthdays he made up for later, and every heartbreak since his wife passed. His daughter Zoe, only 7 years old, held tightly to his rough, calloused hand as they stepped onto the gleaming showroom floor, her eyes wide with wonder at the shining Maseratis and polished BMWs surrounding them like something out of a dream. Marcus wasn't dressed for a place like this. His gray button-up shirt was faded from years of washing, his jeans worn soft at the knees, and his boots carried the dust of a construction site he'd left just hours earlier. But none of that mattered to him, because today was Zoe's birthday, and he had made her a promise 3 years ago that he intended to keep no matter what it cost him. Before they'd even reached the counter, a man in a sharp navy suit approached with a woman on his arm dressed in an emerald green gown, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to humiliation. This was Preston Hale, the dealership's regional CEO, a man who judged people the way most folks check the weather, quickly and carelessly. He looked Marcus up and down, glanced out the window at the beaten-up truck parked crookedly by the entrance, and let out a laugh sharp enough to cut glass. He asked, loud enough for the whole showroom to hear, if Marcus was lost, or perhaps looking for the bus stop down the street instead. The woman beside him giggled behind a manicured hand, and a few salesmen exchanged smirks, but nobody said a word in Marcus's defense. Zoe's small fingers tightened around her father's hand, and Marcus felt that familiar heat rise in his chest, the same helpless anger he'd swallowed 1,000 times before for her sake. Marcus had grown up watching his own father get dismissed the same way, judged by the calluses on his hands rather than the character in his heart, and he'd promised himself he would never let bitterness make him small. He remembered being 12 years old, standing beside his father at a hardware store counter, watching a manager talk down to him simply because his work boots were caked in mud from a long day's labor. His father never raised his voice that day either, and years later Marcus finally understood why. Dignity wasn't something you defended loudly, it was something you carried so quietly that no insult could ever touch it. So instead of arguing, instead of walking out with his pride wounded and his daughter embarrassed, Marcus simply smiled, knelt down to Zoe's height, and asked her quietly which car in the whole room made her eyes light up the most. Zoe, still glowing despite the tension in the air, pointed without hesitation toward the black Rolls-Royce Phantom parked beneath the spotlights near the back wall, its paint so deep and glossy it looked like liquid midnight. Preston overheard her and barked out another laugh, telling Marcus that the vehicle Zoe was pointing at cost more than most people made in 5 years, and suggesting, with venom disguised as humor, that perhaps a used sedan 2 lots down might be a better fit for his budget. What Preston didn't know, what none of them could have possibly known, was that 6 years earlier Marcus had co-founded a logistics software company with 2 college friends, a company that had quietly scaled into a business worth well over $80 million. Marcus had sold his shares 18 months ago after his wife's diagnosis, choosing to step back from boardrooms and conference calls to spend every remaining moment holding her hand instead of chasing another zero on a spreadsheet. After she passed, he never rebuilt the image, never wore the suits, never explained himself to anyone, because none of that had ever mattered to him. He drove the old truck because it was the last vehicle she'd ridden in, because it still smelled faintly of her perfume on humid days, and because comfort had never been the point of his life. Purpose was. Some nights, when Zoe was fast asleep, Marcus would sit alone in that truck in the driveway, engine off, just to feel close to the memory of a life he never stopped grieving. Marcus straightened up, looked Preston directly in the eyes without a trace of anger, and asked him calmly whether the Phantom was, in fact, available for purchase today. Preston's smirk faltered for just a second, replaced by confusion, before he regained his composure and said sure, if Marcus could somehow scrape together $480,000 in cash. The showroom fell into an uncomfortable hush as Marcus reached into the worn leather satchel slung over his shoulder, the same bag he carried everywhere, and pulled out a thick, banded stack of $100 bills, followed by another, and then a third, setting them down on the glass counter with a quiet, deliberate thud that echoed louder than any shout could have. He told Preston, in a voice that never once raised in volume, that he'd pay in full, right now, in cash, and that he'd like the paperwork drawn up in his daughter's name as her birthday gift. The color drained from Preston's face as the reality of the moment crashed over him. Salespeople who had been smirking moments earlier now stood frozen, phones halfway raised to record what was unfolding. The woman in green stopped laughing entirely, her mouth slightly open in stunned disbelief. Preston stammered out an apology, tripping over his own words, suddenly remembering manners he'd forgotten the second he decided Marcus wasn't worth respecting. He offered a discount, then a service package, then anything he could think of to undo the last 10 minutes, but Marcus wasn't interested in apologies born from fear of losing a commission or a job. He simply asked for the finance manager, someone who had actually treated him like a human being from the moment he walked in, a young woman named Danielle who had offered Zoe a lollipop and asked genuinely about her day while Preston was busy performing cruelty for an audience. Marcus made sure it was Danielle who processed the sale, Danielle who received the commission, and Danielle who would remember this day as the one where kindness quietly out-earned arrogance. As the keys to the Phantom were placed into Zoe's small hands, her face erupted into the kind of pure, uncomplicated joy that only children carry, unaware of the lesson unfolding around her, only aware that her daddy had kept his promise. Marcus knelt beside her again, brushing a curl from her forehead, and told her that the truck outside had done its job carrying them through hard years, and that today wasn't about a fancy car at all, but about showing her that dignity was something no one could ever take from you unless you let them. Zoe wrapped her arms around his neck, and for a moment, the entire showroom, filled with people who had underestimated him just minutes earlier, faded into silence around them. Even Preston, still standing frozen by the counter, found himself watching the two of them with something that looked almost like shame settling into his expensive suit. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that the quietest people in the room are often carrying the heaviest, most beautiful stories, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Your support means everything to this channel, and it helps us keep telling stories that matter. Before you go, I want you to do one small thing for me. Down in the comments, just type the word dignity, so I know this story reached you, so I know somewhere out there, someone remembers that true worth was never about what you drive or what you wear, but about the heart you carry through every room you walk into. Marcus never went back to that dealership again, not because he held on to anger, but because he didn't need to prove anything to anyone ever again. He drove Zoe home that evening in the Phantom, her laughter filling the leather seats, while his old truck sat waiting faithfully in the driveway, a quiet monument to everything he'd survived to get there. That night, after tucking Zoe into bed, Marcus stood in the driveway between the two vehicles, one shining under the porch light and the other rusted and familiar, and realized he didn't need either of them to know who he was. And somewhere in that modest house, tucked between memories of a woman he still loved and a daughter who was becoming more like her every single day, Marcus understood that the richest thing he owned had never been money at all. It was the unshakable, unbought dignity of a man who never let the world's cruelty define his worth.